Chapter 4: Theories and Ideas. In 1964, the year before he got married, Stephen went to an important lecture in London by a British scientist called Fred Hoyle. At that time, Hoyle was one of the greatest scientists in Britain, and the room was full of famous and important people. Everyone listened carefully while Hoyle explained his latest theory in cosmology. But when it was time for questions, Stephen stood up and said that Hoyle was wrong. Everybody looked at Stephen. He was only a young PhD student, and nobody knew who he was. But Stephen said that there was a mistake in the mathematics of Hoyle's theory. He said that it did not work. Of course, nobody in the room that day agreed with Stephen. But a few months after Hoyle's lecture, scientists found other problems with Hoyle's theory. Hoyle really was wrong. The Big Bang. Hoyle's theory of cosmology said that our universe has always been the same. But Stephen and some other cosmologists thought that the universe began suddenly a long time ago. The universe was very small at first, they said, but in seconds it became much, much bigger. And it is still getting bigger today. People called this theory the Big Bang. Today, cosmologists think that this is true, and they think that the Big Bang happened about 13.8 billion years ago. The Big Bang was one of the most important ideas in cosmology, and when Stephen was working on it, he was still only in his 20s. Einstein and space-time. To understand Stephen's ideas, we first have to look at the theories of another great thinker, Albert Einstein. In 1905, Einstein had an important theory about space, the empty place between things, and time. Space is all around us. We can start in one place, walk around in space, and then go back to our starting place. But we cannot move around freely in time. Space and time feel different. But Einstein said that they are really two sides of the same thing, like two sides of a piece of paper. We call this space-time. Einstein also explained gravity. Gravity happens because things like stars push into space-time and bend it. This is difficult to understand, but physics teachers explain the idea to their students like this. They take a big sheet of something which stretches, gets longer when you pull it. Then they ask two students to hold the sheet between them, and they put a heavy ball on it. The ball bends the sheet, just like a star bends space-time. When the teacher puts a lighter ball on the sheet, it moves closer to the big ball because the big ball is heavier and bends the sheet more. In the same way, because of gravity, lighter things always move closer to heavier things. For example, a small planet will always move closer to a big one. Black holes. In Stephen's first years at Cambridge University, he used Einstein's theories to study one of the strangest things in the universe, black holes. When a star stops shining, gravity pulls everything in the dead star closer and closer together, and the star becomes smaller and smaller. In the end, gravity pulls everything into one very, very small place in space. Because everything from the dead star is in one place, this bends space-time more and more, and at last a hole is made. The gravity in this hole is very, very strong, so nothing can escape from it, not even light, and it becomes a black hole. When things like other stars come too close to a black hole, they cannot escape its gravity. They fall into the black hole. In the early 1960s, the scientist Roger Penrose discovered something new about black holes. He said that the center of a black hole becomes smaller and smaller, and at last there is no space there. And because space and time are two sides of the same thing, time stops inside a black hole too. This gave Stephen his first great idea. In his PhD, he wrote about the universe at the time of the Big Bang. Stephen said that it was just like the center of a black hole. Everything that later became the stars and planets was in one place. A place with no space and no time. Stephen says that you cannot ask, where did the Big Bang happen? Or what happened before the Big Bang? These are questions about space and time, and there was no space or time before the Big Bang. Chapter 5. A Great Cosmologist. After Stephen finished his PhD in March 1966, he went on working at Gonville and Caius College, Cambridge. Stephen's work in cosmology built on the theories of Roger Penrose, and in the 1960s and 1970s, Stephen studied black holes with him and others. Together, they discovered a lot of important things about the universe. For example, how black holes begin and what happens inside them. They also asked questions about what happens when two black holes meet. Hawking and Penrose won a lot of prizes for their work too, like the Gravity Foundation Prize and the Adams Prize. Stephen became the world's #1 black hole scientist. His work was very important because when cosmologists know about black holes, they can understand many other things about the universe. For example, how it began and what will happen to it in the end. Stephen was teaching at Cambridge University at this time, but in 1974 there was a big change for him. An important university in California, called California Institute of Technology, Caltech, asked Stephen to teach there for a year. So the family went to live in the USA. Stephen and Jane made lots of friends there. Their house was very close to the university, and it was always full of scientists and other friends at the weekends. They had parties and dinners, and Stephen often sat with his friends and talked about science late into the night. At Caltech, Stephen worked with some of the greatest names in physics and cosmology. In 1974, Stephen gave an important lecture, and he explained something very surprising. Nothing escapes from inside a black hole, he said, but radiation comes from a place around the black hole. Because radiation is escaping from around the black hole slowly becomes smaller and smaller, and, after a long time, there is no black hole anymore. Many cosmologists just laughed at this idea when Stephen first explained it, but most people today think that it is true. Soon after this, while Stephen was still in California, he had some important news. A letter arrived which asked him to be one of the scientists in London's world-famous Royal Society. This was a great and exciting thing for a 32-year-old scientist. The Hawkings went back to Britain in 1975. And Stephen started work at Cambridge University again. He was doing very important work in cosmology at this time. And by the end of the 1970s, physicists everywhere knew about him. He was also getting prizes and special degrees from universities and societies around the world. Then, in 1979, Stephen became Cambridge University's Lucasian Professor of Mathematics. This job is for the very best mathematicians and physicists, and some of the greatest names in science have been Lucasian Professor in the past. One Lucasian professor was Isaac Newton, the father of modern physics, and the man who discovered gravity in the late 1600s. Now, Stephen was one of these great people too. Stephen's work brought together many different ideas in physics for the first time, and this started him on a new journey. He wanted to find a theory of everything, one theory that we can use to understand any question in physics, like how did the universe begin? And what is everything really made of? No one has found a theory of everything yet, but many scientists are working on the problem. One day, perhaps, if they find this theory, we can use it to build wonderful new machines, or even travel to the stars. It only became possible for people to visit the moon because of past theories in physics. That is how important these theories are. Some of Stephen's theories about the universe have changed a lot. And sometimes Stephen has been wrong about things too. But this is not unusual in science. Even the great Albert Einstein made some mistakes. Stephen is not afraid to ask big questions. For example, will people travel in time one day? Can scientists make small black holes here on Earth? And are there other universes? We do not know the answers to these questions, but thanks to Stephen, we are beginning to understand how to study them. Chapter 6. A New Voice. In 1963, doctors said that Stephen would only live for about 2 more years. But 15 years later, he was still alive. His disabilities became a little worse every year, and he had many problems, but he did not stop working, and he never lost hope. After 1969, Stephen had to use a wheelchair. He could not use his hands very much by then, so Jane had to write the words for Stephen's lectures for him. And she also had to look after him. By the late 1970s, Stephen could not use a lot of his body. His arms were not strong anymore, and he could not speak easily. Only Stephen's family and close friends could understand his voice. So when he gave a lecture, a scientist friend or a student always helped him. He spoke quietly to them, and then they said his words to everyone in the room. By this time, Stephen could not write notes, so he had to remember everything. He was already good at this, but now he had to be really good. He found special ways to remember things, and he learned to read something once or listen to a lecture once, and then keep it all in his head. Physicists write lots of difficult mathematics when they think about problems. But Stephen could not write, so he had to work in a different way. When Stephen thinks about a problem in physics, he usually uses pictures in his head and not mathematics to find the answers. And because Stephen thinks about things in a different way, he has different and new ideas. He does not have to look at lots of books or sit at a desk when he is working. He carries all his ideas about a new theory in his head, so he can think about it at any time. Once, he discovered something important about black holes when he was getting into bed. In 1985, Stephen was meeting with other scientists in Switzerland when he became very ill. He could not breathe without a machine, and the doctors thought that he would die. They wanted to turn off the machine, but Stephen's wife Jane stopped them doing this. For weeks, Stephen was very near to death. Friends and family stayed by his bed. They talked to him, read books to him, and hoped for him. And he lived. When Stephen was a little stronger, doctors in England opened a hole in his throat. Now he could breathe through the hole and without a machine. But Stephen needed the help of nurses 24 hours a day, and he could not speak anymore. Stephen now needed to talk to people and ask for things in a different way. At first, he used a special A to Z to talk. Friends and nurses held up the letters A to Z one at a time, and Stephen moved his eyes when someone showed him the right letter. In this way, his helper could write his words. But talking like this was very difficult and slow. Stephen wanted something better, so his friends spoke to somebody who made computers and machines for people with disabilities. After a lot of hard work, a special machine was made just for Stephen. With this machine, Stephen had to look at lots of words on a computer and then touch a little box in his hand for the right word. In this way, Stephen could write about 15 words a minute. By the end of 1985, Stephen's machine had a special voice. When he wrote on the computer, the voice spoke slowly for him. Stephen's new computer voice sounded strange, like a robot, but it helped him a lot. Before, when he spoke, most people could not understand what he was saying. Now, suddenly, he could talk to anybody again, even a big room full of people, as loud as he wanted. Stephen's computer has changed since then, because his disease has become worse, and computers have become better. He now wears a small camera because he cannot use either of his hands anymore. When he finds a word on the computer, he moves his face a little. The camera sees this and writes the word. Stephen can now only find 3 words in a minute, so it takes him hours to write or say anything. Writing on a voice computer is very difficult. But Stephen has written many important lectures and 7 books like this. Stephen's computer voice has not changed since 1985. There are lots of new and better computer voices now, but Stephen does not want a new one. His voice has become as famous as him, and when Stephen speaks, everyone knows who it is.